I'm Erica Bierstrom, UW-Madison Division of Extension Agriculture Agent. When we think of farm safety, we think about working with equipment and preventing farm accidents. One aspect of health and safety we might not consider very often is mental and physical health. Today, I'd like to welcome Dr. John Shutske, UW-Madison Professor and Extension Specialist, to talk about this topic. Welcome, John.
I'm just going to talk a little bit about the health status of farmers generally to start things out. First of all, a really good piece of good news is on the whole, farmers and farm employees, people who work and live on farms, tend to be a generally more healthy group compared to the rest of the population. We know that there's a number of reasons why that's the case. Farmers tend to smoke a lot less than the general population. They also, relative to somebody who might work in an office setting or in the city or urban area, they're going to tend to get a little bit more activity and exercise. If you're a dairy farmer and you're doing a lot of the work yourself, you're going to get a lot more exercise. So we know that those are protective from a health perspective. But we also know that there are some unique things that farmers and farm workers face that are concerns from a health perspective. Some examples include certain types of cancer, skin cancer in particular, largely from sun exposure. Hearing loss is another one that's quite common. We also see a number of things that are connected in some cases to stress. So that could include with some people high blood pressure, the possible additional risk of type 2 diabetes. And the other big one that I wanted to just talk about a little bit here today is respiratory health. Farms are really unique because you're dealing with a whole range of dusts, grain dust, silo gas, and also some of the manure storage gases, not to mention some of the chemicals we deal with. That includes pesticides, anhydrous ammonia, fertilizer, and some of the other respiratory hazards that are of concern.
Since you're talking about respiratory hazards, what are your thoughts on the uniqueness of this year and dusty harvest conditions, whether dealing with combining, chopping, working in bins? Tell us a few things about protecting ourselves this year in particular.
Well, Erica, every year we deal with this whole issue of grain dust. It's a really common concern this time of the year. The reason why it's kind of interesting this year, for 30 years in my career, I have traveled around the country, around the states, here in the Midwest, and I've talked about the importance of things like respiratory protection. This is an N95 respirator. We hear a lot about this in the news right now. Why? Because of COVID. And so finding a good respirator like this to protect yourself from grain dust can be really difficult. And the flip side of that is the cheaper paper masks like you might find at Walgreens or Quick Trip or some of our other local stores. These don't provide you with a whole lot of protection. They'll provide you with protection from like helping with the spread of coronavirus, but not necessarily with grain dust. So there is a lot of exposure to dust during the harvest season. There are going to be lots of people exposed, whether you're in a combine or it could be a chopper, while unloading, while blowing, while filling bins and silos and those kinds of things. And almost all of us, if you're running a combine for a couple days or you're around and exposed to grain dust, you're going to probably have some symptoms. They might be as mild as having like a runny nose, maybe some mild kind of scratchiness or like that feeling of postnasal drip. But for some people, it can be worse. You can be, if you're a person who suffers from asthma, grain dust can cause a lot of problems. It can make it worse during seasonal times of the year, also allergies, and then also people who have more chronic, like COPD or other chronic heart and lung issues. So this year, because these N95s are hard to get your hands on, it is really important that you do some things to try to like reduce your exposure. Really hard to do. You got to get grain combined. You've got to get the silage made. So avoid the dust when it is possible. That a big part of that is staying in your equipment. You know, if you're unloading your combine, stay in the machine until you're done unloading, until the dust cloud clears. Also making sure, keep the doors and windows shut, run the blower. Having the blower going, you're going to provide some pressure inside the cab and also make sure that you have a good air filter. The other big thing to do is to use wind to your advantage, to try to get that dust, to try to always be upwind of the dust. You never want to be standing downwind from a big cloud of dust.
What other thoughts and advice for farmers, workers, and family members do you have when it comes to general health?
Get the flu shot as quickly as you possibly can. Also, the other thing that I tell farmers when I'm doing workshops, I'll ask, like, when's the last time you saw your family doctor? If it's been more than a year or two since you last saw your primary healthcare professional, typically that's a family doctor or a nurse practitioner. You can wait until after harvest is over with, but get in, get a physical, get a blood workup, have your cholesterol checked. It's like, if you're running a piece of equipment, you've got to maintain it. And doing the same thing, diagnosis, those sorts of things with your health professional is really critical, but it can wait, but don't wait too long. It's kind of maybe a good New Year's resolution as the end of the year approaches. The other thing that I'll just tell people, and then we'll end here, is that when you go in to see your family doctor, if you feel stressed, if you've had signs and symptoms of stress throughout the growing season, or because things have been particularly difficult, if you're a dairy farmer, with the economics and everything happening, if you've felt those feelings of stress, maybe feeling anxious from time to time, being extremely tired, having trouble getting out of bed, or the flip side of that, having trouble sleeping or sleeping through the night, or maybe you've lost a lot of weight or you've gained a lot of weight, those are all things that are really important to kind of share with your doctor. And make sure that from a mental health perspective, just like you're going to keep that body tuned up like a piece of equipment, you also have to care for your brain, and your family practice doctor is a really great place to start.